All right, here with Kendall, Rodgers, Mike Rooney. Aaron Fitt will jump on with us here in a little bit, but we're all kind of time strapped here, so we're going to jump right into this thing. Welcome, gentlemen, again.
What's up,
What's
RB?
up, RB? Hey, it's a big time of year when we're on the podcast with Brownlee.
Yeah,
Coach Brownlee, you promised there'd be Evansville Purple Aces swag in
I
this
couldn't
podcast. I
find the
see nothing. Let's
jersey,
go.
although it was my dad's birthday this week. So February
Great job,
7th
Brownlee.
is my dad's was my dad's 78th birthday.
Happy
But
birthday, Coach.
yeah, happy birthday, Dad. Love you. I
That's
actually wanted
awesome.
to kind of just throw a left field one here. I was thinking about this. I want your favorite College World Series memory ever.
Ooh,
I'll start. I can start because I've got a couple. So the first one for me is when my dad was coaching and I was younger.
hmm
When the VHS tape highlight reel would show up. You know, the games weren't on TV that much, but my dad would always get the VHS tape in the mail. It would come in like
yeah.
July, and that was like Christmas for me. Now, one I wasn't at, but Brooks Kieschnick throwing 172 pitches in one game. I was at a high school party. We're getting ready to win the state championship in Indiana, but I'm watching this at a high school party, and people are like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm watching this guy. He's at 140 right now, but he got to 172." But then the other one in person is 97. I worked the Yes Clinic with my dad at Rosenblatt, the NCAA tournament. But that one, Kyle Peterson is at Stanford. It was Ron Polk's last year at Mississippi State. Brandon Larson walked off Rice that Friday night for the Friday night game. Roberto Vaz was the Alabama was SEC Player of the Year. Had a broken leg, was
Yeah.
getting bats at home plate, and then Tim Hudson played center field at Auburn. Troy Gloss was at UCLA. Lance Berkman was at Rice, and then Pat Burrell was at Miami.
That's some decent players, buddy.
Wow.
All right, Kendall,
you
what do
know
you
what's
got?
funny? You know what's funny is like one of the earliest memories I have of the College World Series. You remember back in like the mid '90s, like in the middle. So like in the, you guys are a little older than me, so bear with me here. But back in like the mid '90s, when we were at home in the summer in East Texas, I remember like leading up to the College World Series, ESPN would always have like those old like video documentaries of the World Series, like highlights from every
So good.
game. Like, dude, we would sit there all day long and just watch them over and over and over. And honestly, that kind of stuff is why I got into college baseball so much. So, like, that's my earliest memory. But in terms of like, actually being there, I think back to, and Runes will like me pulling this one out. I think back to 2005 World Series when Nebraska finally got to
Oof.
Omaha. And I still remembered the electricity at Rosenblatt Stadium when Andy Gertz hit that grand slam against Arizona State. And then what happens the next, I think it was like the next half inning, Jeff Larish hits one to deep center and Arizona State wins. But I still remember that when Andy Gertz hit that home run to left field for the Huskers, the press box was literally shaking. Like that
Yeah.
place was on fire. And actually, to give ASU a lot of credit, to give Pat Murphy and those guys a lot of credit, I mean, it would have been easy in the middle innings like that in a game like that where it just feels like you're in like a one of those old school like Roman Coliseums and everybody's rooting against you. It'd be easy just to fold, but for Arizona State to win that was pretty impressive. And if I remember right, like Arizona State like had Texas beat in that World Series and kind of fell apart, but like that was a really really good Arizona State team.
Perfect segue, Kendall. So you're conflating
Yes.
2005 and 2009. And 2009 is the one, 2005, that game you just mentioned, Kendall, Jeff Larish hit 3 home runs in that game, and Gary Thorne was the announcer with that iconic voice. I still have that saved on my YouTube favorites, and I'll watch that. I'm telling you, I get the chills watching that. But I'm gonna go with what you just said, Kendall. 2009 College World Series. First of all, let me say this. Anytime you see a picture of clip like give me Roger Clemens in a Texas uniform, Will Clark and Rafi
Yeah.
Palmeiro in a Mississippi State uniform, Barry Bonds in a Sun Devil uniform. Like I am such a sucker. That I love that stuff. But that 2009 Super Regional or College World Series RB, there was like 35 big leaguers in that College World Series. And you're right, Kendall. Mike Leake was 16-0, and ASU had Texas beat 6-0 in the semifinals, and then Augie pulled his magic like he always did, and they came back and win. But like Cole Calhoun was on Arizona State, DJ LeMahieu, LSU, James McCann, Arkansas, Matt Harvey, North Carolina, Brian Dozier, Southern Miss, Dallas
Yeah.
Keuchel, Arkansas, Taylor Youngman, Brandon Belt were on Texas. ASU had Mike Leake and Jason Kipnis. I mean, yeah, that
That's
that
decent.
Yeah, that World Series was bonkers.
And then you have speaking of the ABCA, you have Nolan Kane on the back end for LSU as a reliever.
Yeah, heck yeah, let's go, Coach Kane.
Got to
And
give our coaches some love.
kind of why I brought that up too, because I was thinking last night with the transfer rule going away, with NIL, are we going back to those days where we may not see as many mid majors make it to Omaha anymore?
So I guess I'll go first real quick. I think you will see the bigger schools get better, but I will also say this about college baseball. And I keep using this example. But I think back to last year, when you look at Kennesaw State, you think about a guy like Josh Hatcher, who left Mississippi State because he wasn't going to be a starter this past year. He goes to Kennesaw, becomes one of the best players in college baseball. It's over four. I think we hit over 400 for the Owls last year. And so I think the thing about college baseball is yeah, some of these schools may stockpile talent, but like they have talent too, and those kids have to go somewhere. And B, I just think college baseball is a lot different than it was 20 years ago. Like there's so many programs out there with premier facilities. You think about the job that Justin Hare and Campbell have done, and you look at their facility. I mean, it's just as good as most of the Big Ten, probably better than most of the Big Ten. It's just as good as probably half of the ACC. And so, like, whereas programs like Campbell and that did not have those kind of facilities back then, did not have that kind of pitch, that's not the case anymore. So I think, like, in theory, I guess because of this, yeah, it may be more power oriented, but you could also argue the other direction because of 11-7 and because there's a lot more schools out there that are putting money into college baseball. So, in a very political way, which Rins will tell you, I'm very political. I'm kind of
Really
like
good at
50-50 on it, but I do lean like the power schools getting better and better
Well, and
as opposed to the
Kendall,
opposite.
Texas State has something cooking too, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, perfect example. So you bring up the transfer portal. You think about Levi Wells,
Yeah.
and like he would be Texas Tech's ace for sure right now, like not even close. And now he's an All-American. Was one of the big reasons why Texas State got to regional final last year. You think about Jamie Hitt, Oklahoma. They lose their whole week in rotation. Jamie Hitt transfers from Texas Tech. He's going to be probably their Friday starter. So, yeah, I mean, it does open kind of a new world, so to speak, to where if you click with one of these guys, whether you're a mid major or a power, it could pay some massive dividends.
And
I would
Runes,
add to that,
go
RB,
ahead.
that the portal is a two-way street, just like Kendall's saying. And so, certainly the power schools have the advantage, but they can only put 9 guys on the field. They can't put more than 9 on the field, and kids want to play. I would say the other thing too that's interesting is the NCAA tournament is a small sample size where anything can happen. This is another reason why I'm really passionate about the 32 hosts idea, where it becomes very much like the basketball tournament where like I don't know, like can St. Peter's of college baseball win a regional right now where you got to win 3 games in one weekend? That's pretty tough. But could they win 2 games in a weekend? Oh heck yeah! So anyway, I think it's a very fair question, but I like Kendall. I'm optimistic.
And Runes, back to you. I mean, outside of Stanford, and I think Stanford's got a legitimate chance of winning that thing. Who else on the West Coast? I know the West Coast doesn't always get maybe some of the love early on, but outside of Stanford, and you can talk about Stanford as well, out there on the
Yes,
West Coast.
Stanford's the best roster on the West Coast. It's not close. I mean, the Stanford's on a roll. It's easy to forget. Stanford's hosted 5 straight regionals. I mean, David Esker has got this thing rolling out there. UCLA, it's so ironic. UCLA has not been back to Omaha since 2013. And, John Savage is committed to we're going to recruit freshmen, we're going to play freshmen. They are not doing the portal. And so that's, that's contrarian. But I think UCLA, they invested in that freshman class last year. These kids are really good players and they're a year older. I think UCLA is very viable. UC Santa Barbara and Gonzaga are the programs on the West Coast that have really separated themselves at the mid-major level. I think I would give you San Diego is kind of on the come with Brock Ungrich, but
Yeah.
Gonzaga and UCSB are resetting their rosters a little bit this year, so they're not who they were last year. But on the West Coast, I think the Big West is going to be a free for all. It's going to be fun. But hey, you nailed it. Like Stanford and UCLA those are the 2 teams you got to start with on the West.
And Stanford's been to 2 World Series in a row, and then
Yep.
and they got it going. Got it going. And
Big
Louisville's
time
another
talent.
program in the top 25 that hasn't done a lot with the portal either.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
They're fighting it.
I think that's gonna have to change. I mean, I think if you look at Louisville on paper right now, like offensively, you're buying stock, right? But like if you look at, let's say, Louisville's week in rotation compared to some of the other elite teams around the country, It's not really close on paper. And so UCLA is fine for now, but will they be fine in 3 or 4 years if they don't utilize the portal at all? So it's gonna be interesting. Arizona. Speaking of, I guess you can call it West Coast. Speaking of the West, like Arizona's another team for me. When you look at some of the position players they have, like Tony Bullard, Chase Davis, certainly some swing and miss, but obviously huge power. But anytime you have a guy like TJ Nichols with an electric arm who has been a little bit, up and down, kind of a roller coaster ride. But I mean, he's one of those guys that Runes has seen him great. I've seen him great. If he clicks, I mean, he could be one of the top 7 or 8 pitchers in college baseball.
And the coaching changes in the Pac-12 are significant. Like I think
Yeah.
the early returns on Willie Bloomquist and Chip Hale have been exciting. Andy Stankiewicz at SC, Jason Kelly at UW. I mean, the league is surging in that regard.
And that was my question too. Like everybody talks about the players that switched programs. There's a lot of coaches that switched programs here in the last 2 years too. So what type of effect is that going to have where you have Link Jarrett at FSU? I mean, there's been a lot of those. Dan Fitzgerald at Kansas. There's been a ton of coaching changes as well. And even like a guy like Wes Johnson now at LSU, everybody talks about LSU's players, but that's a big pickup for them as well.
Yeah, and I kind of look at Florida State as like one of those programs that could be like the A&M of last year. And I hate to like put that expectation on somebody, but I think everybody's going to look around and go, oh, okay, who's going to be the A&M of this year? Where they get a new coach, all of a sudden they get a couple of additions, or a couple of guys step up, and all of a sudden they're an Omaha team. And I think Florida State could be that team. I mean, I think when you look at Link Jarrett and the job he's done offensively, like to me, that's probably their question mark, because I think if you look at their pitching. Wyatt Kroll, you look at Jack, the Baumeister kid, Carson Montgomery. Those are all big arms. Kroll is certainly a well accomplished pitcher, but those other two guys are kind of high upside pitchers. And if Chuck Rustano can get those two dialed in, like Florida State could absolutely be an A&M type of team from that A&M was last year. So I think everyone kind of goes into the season going, hey, who can be that slosh / A&M this year? I think Florida State could be that. I don't know if Washington could be that, but I do think Washington, speaking of the West Coast, is going to be much improved. I think they ended last year. People kind of forget that they split with Lindsey Meggs, but like they actually played pretty well at the end of last year. Mm-hmm. I think Kiefer Lord's going to make a really big impact in that week in rotation, and certainly with their lineup top to bottom. Again, if you're buying stock in a West Coast lineup, you would certainly buy stock in the Huskies.
RB, on behalf of the ABCA, I think you need to sit down with Jim Schlossnagle and Link Jarrett and just tell them, hey, boys, let's slow down. You're making this coaching thing look way too easy. Like, let's just kind of calm it down a little bit.
I'm glad. I want
easy.
Everybody to have success when they show up.
Right.
Like, being in it for as long as I was, I want everybody to win every game they ever coach. It's
well
Look at this guy. He's such a I'm the hater of all teams. Brownlee's like the lover of all teams.
I am. Well, Runes and I are the same. Like, I love everybody just on that piece. And by the way, A&M just would they raise like $60 million more to and they don't need to redo their facility. I was just there this fall, the Barnstormers event.
Yeah,
they don't need to redo it. It's beautiful.
Yeah, they put like $40 million into it like a decade ago or so, and now they're going to put in $60 more million. So just $100 million into a baseball park. So. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I would like to get Schloss's take on some of these new pace of play rules, considering how long A&M's at bats were last year.
I was going to ask you guys that too. How much you think that's going to affect teams out of the chute with the step off rule changing, with the clock with runners on? How much that's going to affect teams early on?
I will let Runes pretty much have the stage here because he is a former coach. But I will say this very quickly. I was talking to a couple of coaches yesterday that said it's going to have a massive impact on some games. They said that, early in that bat, it certainly very much favors the pitcher. But as you get deeper and you get anybody on base, it all of a sudden really, really favors the hitter. So it's basically like feast or famine if you're a pitcher or a hitter with these new rules.
Yeah, and I dislike the fact that we're comparing it to the minor leagues when we have these pitch clock conversations, and college baseball is nothing like the minor leagues. The amount of strategy in college baseball compared to the minor leagues is infinitely more. I would have liked to seen an aggressive pitch clock with no one on base, and then let's just actually not have it with runners on base so we can just play baseball. But Kendall nailed it. Making the hitter be in there with 10 seconds left is going to basically nullify offense. Like, it means you can't call play. Like, you either that's not enough time for the coach to think about it, relay the sign. I will say this, RB, like we need to speed the game up. No one's disputing that. when I watched Georgia and Vandy play last year with that pitch calm wristband thing, man, that was pace.
Yeah.
I mean, that I think the technology like that can help solve our problems more than a pitch clock. Here's the other thing with the pitch clock: the umpires don't even want to tangle with it.
It's going to
'Cause
be
it
hard
puts
on
them
them
in a
too. It's
terrible
going to be really
position.
hard on the umpires. Extremely hard.
It'll be hard. I will say this. Speaking of Schlossnagle, you know, I was talking to Jim, and obviously Jim has a pretty elevated role with the ABCA right now, so I'd be curious to see if he kind of advances this. But I know he's really big on the pitch comm technology.
Yeah, the wristband thing, like put the
Duke
always.
was using it this fall for the offense.
Yeah.
They were using it with their offensive side too. And the minor league coaches that I know that are in high A, they said it was much harder on the hitters last year in the beginning of the minor league season than it was on the pitchers.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, what we just cannot have in college baseball is as the sport continues to get better, it continues to get more fans, it continues to cater to people all over the country, is we need less games like A&M and Louisville. And I keep invoking A&M in a negative light. But like what I'm saying is when you look at A&M last year against Louisville, that was a 9-inning game that was 6-4. It started at 7 o'clock and it ended at like 11:50. Like that should never happen.
Yep.
Who else are you guys hearing out there? I mean, well, hopefully Aaron will jump on here because he attacks the East Coast really well. But do you guys feel like everybody's teed up LSU and Tennessee to play for the national championship? Correct.
I think they're just fun. You know, like I think the SC like LSU and Tennessee, I'm curious Kendall's take, but it was pretty easy to start your rankings conversation there, right? Like they're just but I think what's really fun about LSU and Tennessee is more than just how good their teams are. It's just how inflamed their programs are. Like the fan bases are lathered up, the teams are lathered up. You know, like they're not sneaking up on anybody. I've said this a million times. Tennessee in 2022 was one of the best things to happen to college baseball in 25 years. I mean, average fans got excited about college baseball because of that. I think LSU is going to have a similar impact. So, I mean, but you know, that league is just nuts. I mean, if you can survive the SEC, you can win the national title.
But Runes, did it also help college baseball as well that Notre Dame beat Tennessee to go to the World Series?
Oh, heck yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that helps too, right?
It was like Villanova.
The team that's supposed to win it, and everybody's crowned them, but you have an underdog that beats them in the Super, which I think that helps.
If Tennessee was involved, the answer to your question was yes. Everything Tennessee, like they were the car crash that never stopped. Like you could not take your eyes off those guys.
Well, and think about the effect like Ben Joyce had on the country too. Just like everybody kind of following his velocity. But I will say this: I think Tennessee's scarier than they were last year because I think this is a program that I think they look back at last year, they know where they went wrong. They know, you know, whether it's on the field or off the field with emotionally, they know where they kind of went wrong. They know what they need to fine tune as a program. Now, yeah, you lose Drew Gilbert and some guys like that, but now you have Chase Dolander. You've got your whole rotation back. You've got key pieces on the back end of the bullpen with Kirby Cannell and company. You've got all the same coaches back. I think this is a classic situation where the next team is the one that can win it all because I just think they learned a lot of lessons last year. They learned that, you know what, and RB, y'all have both been coaches. You know how this goes, but you know when you're Tennessee and you play at such a insanely high emotional level all the time, and all of a sudden you're in a super regional, your season's on the line, you get kicked in the teeth a little bit. They're in that 6th or 7th inning by Notre Dame. When you're playing up here and you're happy and you're playing up here all the time, man, it's hard to handle that when all of a sudden somebody just kicks the door down. Like takes everything out of your house. Like it's hard to handle that. And they didn't handle that very well. And I think Tennessee learned a lesson from that. And I think they'll be a lot stronger in any situation than they were last season.
Yep.
Hey, RB, I'll segue us to the Big 12. So here's an interesting tidbit for you on the Big 12. I mean, almost every school is replacing their rotations. I mean, it's like brand new pitching in that league. And, you know, and of course it's the last year or two of the league as we know it. And I think the league will just be fine once they realign in baseball. But I think you can't start like the Big 12 conversation starts with Oklahoma State and TCU. I think Oklahoma State had a Omaha team last year. They just, hey, when a preseason top 5 team, Arkansas, is thrown into your regional as a 2 seed, I'm sorry, but that's like really bad luck. You know, like that's just not. It's not great, you know, like, oh, here's the preseason number 3 team in our regional and they're a 2 seed. Like, it looks like a typo almost, but hey, you know, as they say, things happen.
You know, and mid majors,
that is a really interesting league.
Yeah, for me too, in mid majors, you've got Southern Miss in there too. I mean, so there are a few mid majors pieces in the top 25.
Yeah, and I would say that that's fascinating. I'll kind of segue into the Sun Belt real quick. I think the Sun Belt's a really fascinating league moving forward. I think this is a league that year in year out we'll start getting 5 teams in. You think this year with Georgia Southern last year hosting regional, you get Southern Miss added to the league. You get Louisiana. We already talked about Texas State. Troy, Skylar Meade's doing a really nice job there. Brad Stromdahl's done a nice job at Georgia State. Just top to bottom, this league is going to be really good in the future. And I just hope from a realignment perspective, they can kind of keep the pieces together for, the long term. Like, let's hope they can keep these pieces together for a decade, because, this is suddenly a quote unquote mid-major league that I think now in college baseball is a power league, especially at the top.
Yeah, they're like the old American, or the old American. Like they're like the American 5, 6 years ago, but on steroids. Like the American was this new league with 8 teams. They're getting 4 teams in the tournament every year. Southern Miss is that with 16 teams. And
Yeah.
so, no offense to the Big Ten, but I could see the Sun Belt getting more regional teams into the Big Ten on a consistent basis if the Big Ten's not careful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what helps these team twos, guys, is the fact that where they're located from midweek standpoint. Like if you're Troy, you're playing Alabama, Auburn, and teams like that in midweek. And I forgot to mention South Al. I mean, South Al's in that discussion too with all these teams. But you're playing those teams. If you're Louisiana, you're playing LSU, Tulane, Houston, so on, and Texas State's playing Texas and Texas A&M. They have a just kind of an inherent advantage over a lot of these quote unquote upper mid majors, in the sense that they can really bolster their RPI in the midweek, and that's going to make their RPI like in their conference as a whole in the weekend be even better.
I mean, what are you guys looking for here early with some of the early action? I mean, obviously there's a lot going on in Texas early in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, when you look at opening weekend, we just talked about Oklahoma State. We talked about, Arkansas briefly. Texas, speaking of Texas, that's an interesting team this year. You're talking about a program that lost Troy Tulowitzki as their hitting coach. They lost Sean Allen, who was strangely let go. But, he went to Ohio State.
That's a good staff over there, by the way, at Ohio State now.
That's a great Bill Mosiello. I'll say this. If
I was just with them in the fall.
Team to be a lot better than what you expect, keep an eye on Ohio State, because they've got an excellent coaching staff. The thing about Mose is he's going to get the absolute most out of those dudes. Like, that's just the way he rolls, and he'll let you hear about it. We've all clashed with Mo at some point. So yeah, keep an eye on those guys. But like Texas for me is just really like I have no idea what to expect. I think that when you look at their young players, with guys like Jared Thomas and Jalen Flores, I think they're going to make a big impact. But Runes and I've had this discussion before, but I just look at their weekend rotation outside of Lucas Gordon, and I go, am I really believing in Zane Morehouse and like Charlie Hurley to be like a big time Big 12 weekend rotation? I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah, and RB, you had asked what are we looking for early. So I'll give you two thoughts. One is I heard David Pierce interviewed again recently, and he talked about Texas has been to Omaha 3 of the last 4 years. Now, they do have a very new roster in a lot of ways. And, Kendall mentioned the pitching. They have a very brand new coaching staff, and that's interesting. But it's easy to forget the first weekend 2 years ago, 2021, Texas went to that Globe Life deal and got embarrassed. I mean, they got run off the field 3 times. Like, guys are considering quitting baseball that weekend. Like it was not good.
And they lost a series at South Carolina last year, too.
Yeah, right. So sometimes things in the early going can be a little bit tricky, but I would say, like, for me, selfishly, in Arizona, we're going to have Tennessee out here for that MLB4 tournament. I just think the thing about Tennessee is that pitching staff reminds me of the Braves in the 90s. Like, come on with Dolander and Beam and Burns.
Is it
right?
similar to Rice's staff? I mean,
yeah. Oh, for sure it is. It's 3 first-round picks, right?
Yeah.
Kendall? Those are 3 first-round picks.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of when Rice had their 3 guys going.
Yep.
And Ardsma on the back, by the way. Nobody wants to talk
about. By the way,
David Ardsma was pretty good on the back end of that.
Yeah, he was good. And now by the way, Tennessee has Cannon Sewell and the Andrew Lindsay kid from Charlotte that throws a bazillion. But you mentioned, you were asking about mid-majors. Grand Canyon, very interesting. Now, Andy Stankiewicz is gone. Greg Wallace is in. Greg Wallace is great, but his first time as a head coach. Jacob Wilson's going to be a first rounder. They got two legit dudes on the front end, Daniel Avidia, and then also Connor Markle. So Grand Canyon's plucky. Don't be shocked if they give Tennessee a real headache that opening weekend.
Yeah, I mean, that opening weekend for Tennessee guys isn't easy. I mean, you think about Arizona opening day against TJ Nichols. That's going to be a tough matchup for them. And you think about GCU with one of these two guys at the front end. So it's not an easy weekend for the Vols to start things off.
Love it.
Is there a chance that Wake Forest jumps in finally? They're right my neck of the wood.
Answer this one.
So Wake Forest is here's the deal.
Waiting for Aaron to jump on to ask him that.
What? I know, right?
Here's the thing.
He'll jump on now. Is Wake Forest?
I'm going to see them in a couple weekends, and they've got all kinds of talent.
Fitzy's going to get a speeding ticket on his way in to talk about the Deeks. So here's the thing. We all love that coach staff. Tom Walter's a stud.
Oh, good timing. He's jumping in.
Stud. That's right. Deke Day.
Totally shocking that he hops in when we're talking about Wake Forest.
Yeah, this is the segue of all segues. Fitzy, we're gonna set the table for Wake Forest for Fitzy. Here's the thing, RB. 2017, they're a win from Omaha, right? They lose in Game 3 of that Super, but the truth is, between that Game 3 of that Super Regional and then last year's 2022 team, Wake Forest was a soul crusher. They were the team you got excited about and then just struggled for 3 consecutive full seasons. But, as Fitzy will say when he gets logged in here, this year's Wake Forest team, the roster is so strong, you can't look away. They have to be taken seriously because of the talent on the roster.
Yeah. Guys, I'm just glad you went to the bullpen at the perfect time. I could tell Kendall was getting into trouble. His pitch count was getting elevated. He starts talking about the Deeks. He doesn't know where to look. He freaks out.
Right before
and they are my de facto home. They're my de facto home squad because they're 15 minutes from the office. So they're my de facto. I love that staff. I love going over there. It's not always. It's a little chilly early in the year but I love going over there. So they're my de facto home team because they always give me tickets when I go over there. So
I will say this before Aaron does his dissertation on Wake Forest. But I will say this about Wake is it's an interesting year for that coaching staff. Not so much even the players, but the coaching staff, because you have a team that everyone knows should be in Omaha, and just trying to navigate the season with those kind of expectations for a team who we've all talked about it. You guys are former coaches. If you don't have an elite winning culture, it can sometimes be hard to get to that point. So just how they manage that roster and manage the expectations, considering what they've accomplished in the past, will be difficult. But there's no doubt, on paper, this is a slam dunk Omaha team.
And look, it's not like it's some big reach from where they were last year. I mean, they won 41 games. They had a top 10 RPI. They had a legitimate case to host a regional. They went 15-14-1 in the league, the winning record in the ACC with a top 10 RPI. Most years, that's a regional hosting resume. A lot of times, it's the top 8. That's the kind of year they had last year. So it's not like it's some huge leap to say, oh my God, they're gonna be a top 10 team. They basically were last year. If you look at the metrics, and they're just loaded. I mean, what can you say? Outside Tennessee, I don't think there's any team in the country that has the kind of firepower on the mound. You're talking about 3 potential first-round picks. Rhett Lauder, who's the reigning ACC Pitcher of the Year, and you got Teddy McGraw, who's just electric. I'm talking high 90 stuff with a wipeout slide piece and a change. And he's, the numbers last year don't do it justice because he was a totally different guy in the second half after making an adjustment. And then, Team USA, he pitched for in the Cape. I mean, he's a dude, and he's a raw Northeast kid from upstate New York who's just coming into his own. He's an elite talent. And Josh Hartle was the highest ranked pitcher to set foot on campus last year. He's your Sunday guy, unless they put him on Saturday to break up those 2 righties. But I mean, he's your number 3 starter. He's a totally different guy. They've overhauled him this fall. So there's
they played much better defense last year too. They were much better defensively last year than they had been in the past. And, Ty Blankmeyer did a good job with those infielders a little bit, but they just moved around better. They played much better defense, and that lineup's got a chance to be scary too.
That's the thing. Yeah, it's you grade this team out, and they grade out extremely high in every phase, because usually the defense has been the knock on this program, right? That's been the case. You're right. Last year was much better. Now you bring in Bennett Lee, who I think is a huge upgrade behind the plate, the Tulane transfer. They like this shortstop, Justin Johnson, they brought in from Lafayette. We'll see on that. Maybe that's a little bit of a question mark, but I mean, it seems like a solid defensive club with real firepower, real, again, star power, All-American type guys on the corners with Nick Kurtz, who's a first team preseason All-American for us, by the way, hits for power and average, controls the zone, and Brock Wilken on their side. There's just veterans all over the place. I mean, they're loaded. They don't really have an excuse, in my opinion, not to be not to be the class of the ACC this year. And I think it's funny that the coaches didn't pick them even to win their division. I think they picked them behind. I don't know. I think they may be second
behind Louisville.
Behind Louisville.
Yeah.
So,
and there's some history to that too with that. But the other team is Virginia Tech. I mean, obviously they were playing great last year, and then Oklahoma went in and punched them in the mouth, and they couldn't do anything about that. So I'm intrigued to watch Virginia Tech because I think they've got a chance to be really good, and maybe they learn from last year a little bit too.
I have a thought on Virginia Tech, RB, that, when you're doing preseason rankings, when a team loses big-time stars, like I'm thinking of Oklahoma here, you kind of walk away from them because you just feel like there's no way the next wave can be as good as the kids that just left. And I think about Gavin Cross. I think about Tanner Schobel for Virginia Tech. I think about the catcher. I think it's Cade Hunter. These were elite players. But Joe Healy, our offseason acquisition, Joe Healy kind of forced us to dive back into Virginia Tech, and you start looking at that roster, and Jack Hurley and Carson DiMartini, and like Drew Hackenberg is back, and so you start looking at Virginia like, dang, like that is actually a really, really good team again.
And Runes, you just named two guys who are preseason All-Americans for us in Hackenberg and Hurley, and DiMartini could have been. We talked about him at third base, and wouldn't shock me if he winds up being one of the three best third basemen in the country. I mean, he's a great player. He even played some shortstop this fall, and it kind of impressed the scouts with how well he played that position. So more athletic than you think. He's got speed and power and hits for average. Emerging superstar for me as a sophomore.
Actually, before we get back into it, Aaron, you have to answer your favorite College World Series memory.
I mean, I guess for me, I'm going to have to go back to 2010. I guess the first thing that jumps to my mind, Michael Roth, the emergence of the legend of Michael Roth, this guy that I won't say we hadn't heard of, but he was a situational lefty, that they call upon. I think that game in particular, the do or die game where they call on him to start against Clemson, and he goes the distance, right? I don't know if it was a two-hitter or some crazy thing. Yeah. I mean, that was the game to me that and it was at Rosenblatt last year. Rosenblatt, they go on to win the College World Series. I mean, that World Series to me, even though it was bittersweet and it hurt the end of Rosenblatt, it was still magical, and it provided all the theater that I think that place deserved. It was an incredible World Series, and that South Carolina team was so special. Loved those group of kids, and so that's kind of the moment I think about.
Are they back? Is South Carolina back? I mean, they worked through some injuries. Yeah. They're back.
You're just feeding me, fastball down the middle here. You're just like right in my wheelhouse, Coach.
Yeah, can you spin something?
But I love that staff.
And
Kendall and I talked about it. I do love most of the staffs that we have in college baseball, but obviously Mark Kingston coached with my dad at Illinois State, so there's some history. Mike Current was there with my dad at Illinois State, so there's some history there with those guys.
It's really interesting because I think we would all agree that like Mark Kingston's a really good coach. Yeah. If you look at every step of the way in his career, he's been a very good coach. So it's been odd. And granted, they did get to a super regional a couple of years ago against Arkansas. But I mean, for the most part, like things haven't been great there. But I will say this: when you look at South Carolina, as we talked about the A&M model earlier, and Aaron kind of pointed to this in his fall report on South Carolina a couple months ago. But like they kind of followed the A&M model of picking up some upperclassmen pieces out of the transfer portal. When you look at their pitching staff, you've got an All-American and Will Sanders at the front end. You've got a really nice weapon in Cade Austin at the back end. You've got some talented newcomers. So, again, I mean, maybe not Wake Forest potential, but this is a team that definitely could be a top 15, host type of team if everything kind of comes together.
Is Vandy jumping back in too? I mean, I think we just kind of always just expect that they're going to be there as of lately, but
well.
I got a strong opinion on Vandy here. So, Enrique Bradfield Jr., we talked about this a month ago, RB. Like, if Enrique Bradfield Jr. hits 15 home runs, by the way, he hit 8 last year, and he steals 60 bags. Like, look out, Dylan Cruz. Like we're not etching your name in the Golden Spikes Trophy yet, right? Like, and then if Tim Corbin and Scott Brown decide to have Nick Maldonado and Thomas Schultz as the closers, co-closers, like you better not be behind Vandy in the fifth inning, or else you're done. Because those two kids can make 12 outs disappear. Now, if and Carter Holton, I think is I think we had him appropriately put in the All-American thing, but it would not shock me in the least to see Carter Holton be a first-team All-American. I think that kid, remember his last three SEC starts last year, no runs, no runs, no runs. So anyway, I am very intrigued by Vandy. Let's be honest, their position player groups have been underwhelming since 2019, but I think this group's got a little bit more to them, and I think that the pitching could set up to be just, really difficult to tangle with on a weekend.
And we haven't talked about Ole Miss yet. I mean, you guys got them up there pretty high. They can I know it's almost impossible to repeat. Can they repeat?
I mean, they got a chance. There's a reason we got them ranked in the top 5. I mean, I walked away this fall after going into Oxford thinking, hey, wait a minute. Again, like Coach Rooney said, you lose all the stars, the Tim Elkos and the Kevin Grahams and all these players. Doug, they're 2 years removed now from Doug Nikhazy, but like all these guys that were household names there, Justin Bench and Dunhurst, and like you think, oh well, surely they'll take a step back, but boy, I don't think they are. I mean, it's you got a new catcher waiting in the wings, Calvin Harris, who I think is going to step right in and be one of the best catchers in the country. So like that position is solved. You still have one of the best shortstops in the country with Jacob Gonzalez. Kemp Alderman's about to have a monster year. I mean, he's going to be an All-American. That's the most egregious snub from the D1 baseball All-America team. Kendall wouldn't let me put Kemp Alderman on the All-American team. I'm just kidding. I like to throw Kendall under the bus when I can, but they're going to be very offensive again, and I know that it's different names. I love Ethan Groff and Ethan Leger, the junior college transfer, Calarco, the transfer from Northwestern. They did a great job in the portal, kind of beefing up that lineup. And my only concern is there is less experience on the mound now, and losing Josh Mallett's the closer, which happened, I believe, after we ranked this team in the top 5. That's a blow.
Fun fact, Clerco's brother played for me in the Junior Futures games, the Prep Baseball Report Junior Futures games. That's a fun fact. The younger one. Runes, I know you got to go. Before you go, who's been your favorite Sunday conversation that you had?
Ooh, that's a good question. I've loved the pitcher conversations because that's really not my area. The two that have stuck out for me were the pitcher conversations because they're tangling with technology, but you still got to throw strikes, and the catcher conversations makes me like we had two catcher conversations. It made me feel like there's a bunch of future head coaches there. Netting Pros was our sponsor. I met Johnny Burbank at the ABCA convention. That was that's going to be on my top 10 list of things that happened to me in 2023. And RB, as I bid adieu, you're going to ask me for my Golden Spikes winner, and I'm going to say Joe Healy of D1Baseball.com. Joe Healy is going to win the Golden Spikes this year.
All right, Rains. Thank you, sir.
Great to see you, boys.
Yep.
We know it's not going to be Kendall Rodgers. Kendall can't win any
J.
award.
Rodgers.
Or guys, for his career when it comes to awards.
Hey, that's all right.
Aaron and Kendall, what did you guys think of the convention
Coach.
this year? What were your thoughts coming out of the convention this year?
I thought it was really good. I mean, I think it was certainly very informative. I wish I would have probably listened to the discussion on the pace of play rules a little more, just because that's a really, really hot button issue with the coaches right now. And I would also say this. I think I said this on a previous podcast, but like for coaches, I guess Division I coaches that are listening in is be active in some of these meetings, like whether it's the rules meeting or the Division I meeting. Like nobody got up and spoke, but I can tell you right now, I've gotten calls from multiple coaches since then complaining about stuff, and it's just like if you have something to say, like be vocal about it at the ABCA. But I thought it was an awesome event as usual, man. It was terrific.
And I would stand up, like even though I was kind of a nobody at that point, I still would stand up and voice my opinion on things, on what's best for college baseball. And that's like if you have an issue, like get up, talk, say, hey, this is what we feel like is best for college baseball.
Well, I was still thinking back to Aaron Mike can correct me. I forget years, but there was one year, I think it was whenever they were debating the transfer, the old school one-time transfer. I still remember like Tony Vittorio when I think he was it Dayton at the time?
Dayton.
And like him and Jack Leggett, like they weren't about to fight or anything, but like they were like kind of yelling at each other, debating this whole one-time transfer deal. And like, I'm not saying you need to yell at each other, but like those kind of debates are healthy for the sport.
Yes.
Because I can tell you right now, there are coaches out there who want like no transferring, want the most minimum roster possible, and all these things. When there are other coaches who want 40-man roster, unlimited counters, more scholarships, and it's just two people on totally different wavelengths. Like I think it's important to kind of talk because you know what, it's kind of one of those things like you learn a lot by just listening. Yeah. And I think the more guys can talk at those meetings, I think other coaches might learn something they otherwise would have never learned.
Aaron, who else out there? I mean, obviously, North Carolina is in the top 25. Maryland.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some programs that have been really good here the last few years, and North Carolina's gonna have some firepower back.
Yeah. We can talk about. I don't know who you guys talked about already.
We haven't.
You can feed me. Okay. Yeah. I mean,
focus on the Carolinas area. That's the area we really didn't focus on.
Yeah, I mean, North Carolina is once again, it feels like very offensive. They were scary down the stretch last year. When they went on that torrid run, I mean, boy, they could hit for a ton of power and speed, and it was kind of a wrecking ball. And most of those guys are back. Obviously, Vance Honeycutt's one of the best players in the country. I mean, power, speed. He could be the first 35 guy. I don't know. Like he was close to 30 last year. I mean, it's 29 steals, 25 home runs, or vice versa. It was. I mean, he's an awesome dynamic player. But Mac Horvath, kind of sneaky, like could be a 2020 guy. He steals bases and hits for power. And Alberto Osuna has power. And I really like the defensive personnel up the middle with like a Tomas Frick and a Colby Wilkerson. These kind of veteran guys, in addition to Honeycutt, who's just, in my opinion, the best defensive center fielder in the country, period. Bradfield, Cruz, there's some really good ones out there. Honeycutt's the best. So they're going to play great defense. I think they're actually deeper on the mound. They have, you still got your kind of workhorse veteran Max Carlson guy at the front, but I like some of the emerging pieces. The Dalton Pence coming off a redshirt year, left-hander, looked great this fall. Connor Bovier, power arm, second year now after transferring to Siena. I could see him having a big step forward now that he kind of is familiar with the ACC. Got a great arm. Anyway, it feels like last year it was a little bit of smoke and mirrors with the pitching staff. And that way it was almost like East Carolina, where it's like, it kind of held it together, a lot of mixing and matching. And East Carolina is another team that it just feels like they're much better on the mound. They're more stable. They're going to get more length out of their rotation this year. We'll see if they stick with the plan to leave Carter Spivey in the rotation, a guy that was the conference pitcher of the year last year as a reliever. I mean, he's been extended. He could work multiple innings, but he was actually really good in the postseason when they started him. But, if they leave him as their Friday guy, eats up a lot of innings. I feel like they've got the pieces in the bullpen to make that work. And then Josh Groves, maybe Atreya Savage could be, workhorse 6-7 inning guys with power stuff. So East Carolina last year felt like the offense was their strength, like North Carolina, and both those teams I feel like are much better in the mound. Pirates maybe less potent offensively, but still plenty of veteran guys there. They're going to play defense like they always do. But it feels like this year for East Carolina, it's more of a pitching strength. I'm really excited about those two teams facing off early in the season. I think it's week 2.
And Campbell series. Too. You got East Carolina and Campbell are going to square off like that. I love being in this area now because especially the midweek stuff and all the other stuff you have going on. Yeah. Who was the best team you saw this fall? Like coming away was like okay, or were there like 2 or 3 where it's like kind of neck and neck?
Yeah. So I mean, we talked about Ole Miss. That was certainly on my short list. Oklahoma State and Arkansas, I made a trip out that way. I like both those teams. They're both in our top 10. I would say out of the teams I saw, because I didn't see some of the teams at the top of our rankings, those were probably the 3. I mean, I actually didn't say Wake Forest either this fall, which is a crime. But
but you know what you're going to get out of them. Kind of know what you're going to get with their guys.
That's right.
Kendall, what about you?
Yeah, Aaron, you liked Oklahoma a lot too, right? Yeah. Even though we didn't have them ranked preseason, you liked their club.
Sleeper club for me, like they were for you last year. That team, I think, is just going to be super fun to watch with all the speed and
don't count that coaching staff out either. I mean, we have so many good coaching staffs, but that coaching staff's going to get everything they can out of their team.
The real deal.
Can I be really cliche?
Yes.
The best team I saw in the fall was LSU.
Yes. I would hope.
Hey, in all seriousness, like I think the second pitch I saw in my first fall scrimmage, Dylan Cruz hit a home run, hit a line drive, like just an absolute missile over left field wall. Tommy White hit 2 home runs, like it was a clinic. I think my main takeaway from that though was the fact that we've talked so much already in this pod about personalities in the program. And I thought when you looked at LSU in that scrimmage, granted it was the middle of the fall, but like that was a very business-like approach. It was a very dialed-in team, and it seemed like a really close team. And so, I think in the fall, if you're seeing those kind of hallmarks, like that's big going in the spring. So they were the best team I saw. Obviously, A&M was really good. I think keep an eye on Nathan Detmer. He was a guy that when I saw him this fall, he was up to 97, 98 with his fastball last year. He would bump 95, but for the most part, it was 90, 94. Again, I saw Texas. I think U of H. I think Todd Whitting has a really nice club down there. Get Zach Arnold and Ian McMillan back on the left side of the infield. And keep an eye on Matt Deggs' club at Louisiana. Carson Roccaforte. That's a name that, guys like Aaron and myself and you know, but he is going to be a household name in college baseball this year. He's an electric player. He's going to be full-time center field for the Cajuns. And if Louisiana, if they can get, kind of more consistent, more stable elite pitching, they could be a team I could very easily see in Omaha because they're going to be electric offensively when you think about it. Roccaforte, Heath Hood, Kyle DeBarge at shortstop. I've been on that train for a couple of years now. And kind of the list goes on. They're going to be a really good club.
And with LSU, I mean, you're kind of forced. You better take care of business with that roster because if you don't, you're not going to be on the field. I mean, that's part of it.
I will say
you better
this,
bring it
RB,
every day, or you're not going to be on the field.
Yeah, but I'll say this, RB, and we've talked about coaches and how good coaches are. I think they have the perfect coach for this kind of season. I think Jay is one of those guys that is such a.
He coached Chris Bryant.
Laid back.
Like that's the thing. Like he coached Chris Bryant, so like he knows how to deal with egos and expectations with guys.
I feel like Jay is one of those coaches. I'm trying to think of the best way to put this, but like he's one of those coaches who legitimately just coaches in the moment. Like he coaches in the situation that is presented to him. And like last year, they lose in a regional final, and his whole message is like, we didn't have enough pitching. Like, I don't ever want to be in this position again. And like he just goes out in the offseason and just goes scorched earth and gets the team he needs to get. And now he goes in the season, and you kind of, we talked to him in Nashville. We sat there and at the Fuse and talked to him for like an hour. And you ask him about the expectations. You ask him about how good this team's going to be. And, like, it is a dude that is not phased whatsoever. Like, it is not a guy that's nervous. It is not a guy that's going, oh, no, LSU fans might yell at me if we lose a weekend series to Alabama. Like, he knows what the expectations are, and he's not remotely scared of that. And the thing about teams is, and you've been in this position before, is they sometimes take on the personality of their coach. I don't think it's any coincidence that Ole Miss, you look at Ole Miss overall, Ole Miss is a program that a few years ago people always said, oh, well, they play tight in the postseason because Mike Bianco, looks like he's, uptight, nervous in the dugout. I don't think it's any coincidence that last year that Mike Bianco is in a situation to where, let's all admit it, he's essentially saving his job. He basically goes out there with like nothing to lose, coaches lose, and all of a sudden, what does his team do? They go in the postseason, and they look like gangbusters. So I think teams feed off of whatever the personality of the coach is.
And Tim Tatlock at Texas Tech, like for me,
that's a great example.
Great, just low pulse, just goes about his business, and Texas Tech plays that way.
But it's funny because there are some other coaches out there that I feel like are very tightly wound, and yet, like if you think about, hey, like Tim Corbin is one of the best coaches in college baseball history. He is tightly wound. But if you look at his best teams, like the 14-15 teams, that group of players, and Corbis did a masterful job by the time we got to the postseason, like kind of letting them go, right? Like loosening the reins and letting them gallop and be themselves and have fun. And Ray Tanner was the same way, but when he really figured it out was when, those 2010, 2011, 12 teams, he just let those kids with all the big personalities go out there and be themselves and have big personalities. And they got to Omaha and like, they didn't like, they weren't all tense about the whole experience. They just like, all right, guys, like, I trust you now. It's like the analogy that Corbin always talked about with like you letting the kids like now they got their driver's license, whatever. Like you got to just kind of let them go.
Yeah.
And so I do think that there is a room even though over the course of a given season for coaches to change kind of their style with the way they approach a team, right? I mean, it's just going into
The best
year,
ones can adjust as needed.
Yeah,
The best
that's
ones
it.
adjust as needed.
Even in 2014, 15, I'm sure going into those seasons, Tim Corbin was probably still like, ruled with an iron fist, if you will. But by the time we got to May, in June, the games mattered more and he was more hands off. And I just think that that's maybe the way that a lot of the great ones approach it.
What are some final thoughts before I let you guys go? I know you're time crunch. You got a big podcast coming up tomorrow, correct?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is just, how often in college baseball do you see the best team not win it? And I think the percentages are that somebody like LSU is not going to win it. And the percentages are someone like Tennessee is probably not going to win it. So who's it going to be? I mean, you got Arkansas was the sixth place SEC team. They were our 8th ranked team in the country. So, is it out of the SEC? Is it somebody like Wake Forest out of the ACC? I still think there's going to be some teams emerge. I still look at Florida State as a club that I know, Aaron, myself, and Runes all looked at pretty extensively in our top 25 discussions. I still think that's a team for me that when you look at the rotation and you look at the impact that Link Jarrett has on offenses, that's a club that I think at the end of the year we could look at and go, man, I can't believe we didn't rank them. And so I'll be very curious to see just how all these schools with coaching changes do. Keep an eye on UW out on the West Coast, though. I think Jason Kelly has some really premier talent on the front of that rotation. And I think they're going to hit. Keep an eye on UW. That's my sleeper in the Pac-12.
Aaron, who you got?
Yeah. I mean, Kendall's right. I mean, the best team, quote unquote, never wins a thing.
It's the best thing about college baseball.
Number one national seed hasn't won it all since 1999. Miami, the very first year of the 64 team era. That's the only time it's happened. And so LSU is the best team. They could go out and have the best season, like Tennessee did last year, or Oregon State did in 2017 when they went 54-4 or whatever the heck it was and didn't win it all. I mean, the next year they do. Maybe this is the year after for Tennessee. I could totally see that happening. The team after the team, as people always say. I think there's a lot to that. There's a little bit less pressure on kids. They've been through it a little bit more. I mean, you look at Arkansas last year. I know they didn't win it all, but like they had, the year after they were the juggernaut team. Didn't get to Omaha in 2021, after being the number one national seed. It was devastating. They come back and they do get to Omaha. And I certainly think Tennessee will be in Omaha. And if I had to pick somebody right now, that might be who I'm picking.
Love it.
What about Wake?
I mean, got to get, I feel like teams that I do feel like there's something to be said for like breaking through. Like usually the first time team doesn't. I mean, Coastal did in 2016. That was rare, for a team with a group
They'd
of
been building
coaches.
for a while, though. Coastal had been building for a while. Like you could tell something was brewing there with those guys. Like they were just right there.
And the makeup with that group of kids too was like that 2015 Vanderbilt team or the 2010 South Carolina team. For me, like those are probably my 3 favorite groups of players that I think I've ever covered. Just from the personalities and there's just something special in the air with those kids. And so we got to find out who that group is this year. Who's that group of kids that just has the magic. We'll find. That's the great part about college baseball. We get to find out as we go.
As always, appreciate the partnership, gentlemen. It's good stuff. Keep up the great work. I love it, and I enjoy following you guys all year.
Thanks, RB. Good talking to you, man.
Always a pleasure, Coach.